26 September 2022, shortly before 8 p.m. It is a quiet evening. A sailboat rocks on the waves of the Baltic Sea. The captain is preparing for the night. He glances at his radar. Suddenly, 2 red dots flash on it. He stares into the darkness, at the open sea. Nothing to be seen. He contacts a nearby ship. The crew reports huge whirlpools in the water. As the ship approaches the spot, a pungent smell hits him. A mixture of rotten eggs and gas. He immediately informs the Swedish authorities. They confirm tons of gas are bubbling uncontrollably into the Baltic Sea. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines have leaks, caused by 4 time-delayed explosions at 2 different locations, about 75 kilometers apart. It quickly becomes clear this was no accident. It was an attack. The largest act of sabotage in European history. An action that led to the largest methane leak in history and endangered the energy supply of Europe's largest economic power. Authorities and journalists are working tirelessly to track down the perpetrators and masterminds. Several theories about the course of events and possible motives are circulating. So what really happened under the surface of the Baltic Sea? Who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? The leaks were found by Danish military aircraft. On Monday, they had seen rising gas off the island of Bornholm. Huge amounts of gas, with which the pipeline was filled for the necessary pressure, continued to flow from the leaks.
Gefunden hatten die Lecks dänische Militärflieger. Sie hatten am Montag nahe der Insel Bornholm aufsteigende
Blasen entdeckt. They believe leaks in 2 major Russian gas pipelines to Europe are the result of sabotage.
Aus den Lecks strömen weiterhin gewaltige Mengen Gas, mit denen die Leitung für den nötigen Druck befüllt war.
Diese Nord Stream Pipelines ein Dorn im Auge waren, liegt auch auf der Hand.
Verschwörungstheorien.
Das wichtigste Ermittlungsverfahren in der Nachkriegsgeschichte der Bundesrepublik Deutschland.
These Nord Stream pipelines were a thorn in the side. Suspicions, conspiracy theories, the most important investigation in the post-war history of the Federal Republic of Germany. These are Nord Stream 1 and 2, the longest underwater pipelines in the world. Cost, around 17 billion euros. They run through the Baltic Sea, directly from Russia to Germany. In September 2005, Vladimir Putin and Gerhard Schröder
Wir brauchen dieses Gas und es ist das kostengünstigste, das wir bekommen können. Und jeder, der sich mit Energiepolitik beschäftigt, weiß das auch.
Sealed the construction of the first pipeline. The decision is Schröder's last major official act as chancellor. Shortly after his failed re-election, he becomes chairman of the supervisory board of Nord Stream AG and a lobbyist for several Russian energy companies, such as Gazprom. We need this gas, and it is the most cost-effective we can get, and everyone who deals with energy policy knows that, too. His successor continues to push the project forward. From 2011, cheap natural gas flows through the Baltic Sea to Germany. Russia receives around 10 billion euros annually for this. Economically, Nord Stream 1 is a success story for both countries. Soon, Russia covers about half of Germany's gas consumption. Plans for a second pipeline emerge, but many states are against it. The USA warns that the project would enable Russia to use gas as a political pressure tool. The EU also wants to become more independent of Russian gas supplies. The rejection is particularly fierce in Eastern Europe. For a long time, Russia could only deliver its gas to Europe via Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states for high fees. With the new Baltic Sea pipelines, these countries can now be bypassed. Some military experts suspect that Putin would have invaded Ukraine earlier if he had not been dependent on the gas pipeline through the country. But the German government sticks to the project despite the criticism. Shortly after the illegal annexation of Crimea, Merkel approved the deal for a second pipeline. Construction is completed at the end of 2021, but a few days before the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, Scholz stops the commissioning of Nord Stream 2. A few months later, Putin stops the gas supply through Nord Stream 1. However, the pipelines remain filled with gas. The deliveries can therefore be resumed at any time. But then,
Was wir aber sehr klar sagen können, ist, wer ein Interesse daran hat, dass das zerstört wird. Und da komme ich über kurz oder lang immer wieder auf Russland, weil es um Unsicherheit geht, um steigende Energiepreise.
This happens in September. But who is behind it? Hardly any body of water is as well monitored as the Baltic Sea. Every larger ship must share its location via GPS, and the explosives needed for the sabotage of two pipelines would be very difficult to obtain. It quickly becomes clear that only.
Als ich das erste Mal davon höre, da denke ich, das sind doch bestimmt die Russen. Das passt einfach zu gut in das klassische Muster der Russen, die sabotieren und ähnliches.
A state actor could be behind the attack. Many politicians first suspect Russia. What we can say very clearly, however, is who has an interest in it being destroyed. And sooner or later, I always come back to Russia, because it's about uncertainty, about rising energy prices. The Russian state-owned company Gazprom is also facing billions in compensation claims for the gas stoppage in the summer of 2022. An explosion could release the operators from their contractual obligations. Holger Stark is deputy editor-in-chief and head of investigative journalism at Die Zeit. He has researched Nord Stream extensively. When I first hear about it, I think it must be the Russians. It just fits the classic pattern of the Russians, who sabotage and so on. And at first, the suspicion is confirmed. On the morning of September 22, 2022, 4 days before the attack, the Danish naval vessel P524 Nymphen is on patrol off Bornholm.
If Russia invades, there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
It detects 6 Russian ships, exactly where the pipelines will later explode. They are sailing as dark ships, meaning they have turned off their position data. Among the ships is the SS-750, a nearly 100-meter-long special vessel for underwater operations with a mini-submarine with cranes for heavy loads on board. Exactly the kind of equipment you would need for a pipeline explosion. 3 months earlier, 2 Russian military ships were also sailing under the radar, including at the scene of the attack. What were they doing there? At about the same time, the USA is also suspected. A few weeks before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Biden and Scholz give a joint press conference.
Ich glaube, dass Cy Hirsch da einfach einen alten Fahrensmann irgendwo in seiner Geheimdienst-Community hatte, der irgendein bisschen was gehört hat und ihm eine Geschichte erzählt hat. Er sagt selber, er hatte eine einzige Quelle und er sagt selber auch, diese eine Quelle kenne die Geschichte nur vom Hörensagen und sei nicht selber mit dabei gewesen. Das heißt also schon mal da ein Widerspruch allen journalistischen Regeln zum Trotz.
6 months later, both pipelines are blown up. Seymour Hersh, one of the most famous investigative journalists in the world, speaks out. He claims that elite divers from the U.S. Navy placed several explosive devices on the pipelines during a NATO exercise in June 2022. They were said to have been supported by a Norwegian mine-hunting vessel and a surveillance aircraft. A possible motive? To oust Russia as a gas supplier in order to sell U.S. fracking gas better in Europe. Norway, as a major gas supplier, would also have benefited from this. But doubts about the story quickly arise. The recorded aircraft movements cannot be reconciled with the story.
Also von den vielen, vielen Ermittlungsverfahren, mit denen ich es in den letzten 20 Jahren zu tun gehabt habe, zählt Nord Stream ganz eindeutig zu den Komplexen, die am verschlossensten, am geheimsten und am delikatesten gewesen sind. Insbesondere in der Anfangszeit stand da jeder, der auch nur Kontakt zu Journalisten in der Angelegenheit im Ruche, ein Verräter zu sein. Da war echt ein dicker Deckel drauf.
Specifically named ships were also not on site. I believe that Cy Hirsch simply had an old hand somewhere in his intelligence community who had heard a little something and told him a story, he says. He himself says he has only one source, and he also says that this one source only knows the story from hearsay and was not there himself. So that's already a contradiction of all journalistic rules. In the years before, Hirsch, who is now 87 years old,
Wir haben mitbekommen, dass die Andromeda-Yacht eine Rolle gespielt haben könnte.
Has repeatedly attracted attention for sloppy work and crude theses. Today, Hirsch no longer speaks publicly about his theory, but the hottest trail leads neither to Russia nor to the USA. Holger Stark receives a crucial tip shortly after the attack from a contact in the world of security authorities. And I'm talking to him, someone I've known for a long time, and I say, Russia, or everything points to Russia, and he looks at me with a silent but doubtful look, and shakes his head slowly. German authorities immediately begin their investigation after the attack. The Attorney General takes up the case. Of the many, many investigation proceedings I have had to deal with in the last 20 years, Nord Stream is clearly one of the most complex, most secretive, and most delicate.
Wir saßen bei ihm im Garten und ihm kam die Passnummer, die wir ihm vorgelegt haben, sehr bekannt vor. Er sagte uns, ja, das ist die Nummer meines alten Reisepasses, der abgelaufen ist. Und er konnte sich absolut nicht erklären, wie seine Daten nur zu diesem Nord Stream-Anschlag irgendwie und zu den Attentätern gelangt sein könnten.
Especially in the beginning. Anyone who even had contact with journalists on the matter was considered a traitor. There was really a tight lid on it. Because of the high political sensitivity of the attack, investigative journalists pool their resources in two large alliances. Der Spiegel together with ZDF, and on the other side, Die Zeit together with ARD and at times also with the Süddeutsche Zeitung. You can find the impressive research and reports linked in the description. Julia Klaus from ZDF Frontal was involved in the research. Despite massive secrecy, at least one piece of information leaks out. We heard that the Andromeda might have played a role.
Und hinter dieser Firma steht ein ukrainischer Geschäftsmann aus der Kiewer Schattenwelt oder Halbwelt, der ganz erkennbar genutzt worden ist in Kiew von den mutmaßlichen Drahtziehern für eine Gefälligkeit, nämlich das Anmieten und Bezahlen dieser Yacht.
The Andromeda, a German sailing yacht, only about 15.5 meters long. Can such a small sailing yacht be used to carry out such a large professional attack? The Andromeda has a big advantage over larger ships. It is inconspicuous, and it does not have to send radio signals. The journalists find out that the Andromeda was chartered from the company Mola Yacht.
Wir sind den Verdacht nicht losgeworden, dass es in Deutschland verschiedenen Leuten, die früh von diesen Ermittlungen wussten, am liebsten gewesen wäre, wenn da nie ein Wort an die Öffentlichkeit gedrungen wäre.
In Rostock-Warnemünde from August 27 to September 24th for $11,900. Payment was made from the account of a Polish travel agency. 2 passports were presented to the company, a Bulgarian and a Romanian one. The name on the Romanian passport, Stefan Marcu. Stefan Marcu lives in Moldova. Julia Klaus and her team get on a plane and ring his doorbell. We sat with him in his garden, and the passport number we showed him seemed very familiar to him. He told us, yes, that's the number of my old expired passport, and he absolutely could not explain how his data could have somehow gotten to this Nord Stream attack and to the assassins. The passport was fake. The Bulgarian passport, with the name Michael Popov, also turns out to be fake. A team from ZDF Frontal and Der Spiegel finally goes to the harbor itself, in Vik on Rügen. There, they speak with the harbor master. He remembers the Andromeda crew. The journalists also speak with other witnesses and even charter the sailing. Ship themselves. Little by little, they can trace which harbors the boat must have docked at. Holger Stark and his team follow another lead, the Polish travel agency from whose account the money for the chartered yacht was transferred. It turns out to be a letterbox company. And behind this company is a Ukrainian businessman from the Kyiv Shadow World, or Demimonde, who was clearly used in Kyiv by the alleged masterminds for a favor, namely the chartering and payment of this yacht. Georg Heil, head of editorial staff at ARD Kontrast, also received a tip early on. In early March 2023, ARD and Die Zeit published their research to date. At this time, there is a discussion in Germany about whether to support Ukraine with tank deliveries. A revelation that Ukrainians may have attacked a German-Russian pipeline is politically highly explosive. We could not shake the suspicion that some people in Germany who knew about these investigations early on would have preferred it if not a word had ever been made public. During this time, it is also suspected that the trail to Ukraine could be a false lead deliberately planted by Russia. A false flag operation. In other words, a move to unsettle the German public. But by this time, the highest government circles have long been clear about who should really be the target. German authorities have been hot on the heels of the alleged perpetrators for months. June 2022, 3 months before the Nord Stream explosion, a top-secret encrypted report arrives at the Berlin headquarters of the Federal Intelligence Service. Sender, the Dutch Military Intelligence Service, MIVD. An informant is said to have informed the Dutch about an impending attack on Nord Stream 1. The alleged perpetrators, a Ukrainian special commando unit traveling with fake passports and a chartered boat. The attack is supposed to take place in just a few days, on June 19th. Shortly thereafter, another warning arrives from the CIA. They were also warned by the Dutch. When June 19th comes, the day of the announced attack, nothing happens. The warnings are dismissed as a false alarm. Neither the federal police, nor the Navy, nor counterterrorism centers are informed. 3 months later, the pipeline is actually blown up, almost exactly as predicted. The investigators immediately turn their focus to Ukraine. January 2023. 4 months after the explosion. On the Andromeda, the authorities find DNA material and fingerprints, a drinking bottle, a single barefoot shoe. On a table and in the toilet, they find traces of the underwater-capable explosive HMX, also known as Octogen. This was also detected on the pipelines. It quickly becomes clear to the investigators that the secret operation was carried out with this ship. But who are the alleged perpetrators? The decisive clue comes from a photo. A van thunders through the streets of Rugin in the early morning hours. The driver was hired to chauffeur several Ukrainians to the harbor. He doesn't know who he has on board. In the trunk is diving equipment. The driver is driving fast. Too fast. The speed camera photo shows a white Citroën Space Tourer with a Ukrainian license plate. Also, the driver and an unknown passenger. The investigators track down the unsuspecting driver. He confirms who his passenger was, a Ukrainian named Volodymyr S. Bingo. It will be one of the decisive clues that finally leads the German investigators to Volodymyr S. In June 2024, they issue a European arrest warrant for him. Over time, more and more connections lead to Ukraine. The alleged crew can be identified. Der Spiegel speaks with a Ukrainian informant who, according to his own statements, was involved in the preparation of the coup. The most likely course of the attack can now be reconstructed quite accurately. Music. Spring 2022 in Kyiv. A rented office space, a small commando troop. Their alleged head, Roman Chervinsky, a Ukrainian intelligence legend. The others have also partly received CIA training. Their specialty, sabotage and secret operations. They are all Ukrainian patriots. After Russia's invasion of their country, they want to weaken Putin significantly. As a target, they decide on the Nord Stream pipelines, which had previously funneled billions into the Russian dictator's war chest. For their operation, they need trained divers. 20 are short-listed. In the end, they decide on 4, all civilians. In addition, there are 2 soldiers. In the end, there is a small, motley crew of 6 Ukrainians who hardly know each other. The morning of September 8, 2022. The yacht harbor in Vik on Rügen. A sailing yacht docks behind the harbor office. It was chartered 2 days ago in Rostock-Warnemünde by a small crew, supposedly for vacation. In reality, they are planning an attack that will shake the world. First, there is Volodymyr S., a heating installer in his mid-40s who lives in Poland. He is also a diving instructor, specializing in diving at special depths. Second, Daria Koman, or at least that's her code name. In her early 40s, petite, with brunette hair. She runs a small Ukrainian diving school with her husband. Volodymyr S. was formerly one of her employees, a diving instructor. Third, Daria's husband, codename Volgard, and also a deep-sea diver, pale, boyish with thinning hair. Fourth, the commander, codename Rubik, an experienced commando soldier. Strongly built, a good diver. He is the operations leader of the Andromeda. He regularly calls Kiev. For this, he has 16 cell phones and plenty of prepaid cards. Fifth, the captain, an active soldier, surly, unsympathetic, broadly built. Quote, from a German eyewitness, like someone who has eaten too many hamburgers. Sixth, the assistant, small, middle-aged, they get to work right away. A harbor employee can observe them well from a distance. They lug shopping bags almost to 100 meters. Through the harbor, they unload a van several times. Next to the assistant, a conspicuous number of compressed air cylinders are stacked. The harbor master approaches him. Why don't you drive closer? Do you need help? The assistant waves him off. It's fine. It is probably the last moment in which the commando could have been stopped. The harbor master doesn't know that these cylinders are each filled with up to 35 kg of explosives. A little later, the Andromeda casts off. Operation Diameter begins. The 2 Nord Stream pipelines run along here, Nord Stream 1 and the recently completed pipeline, Nord Stream 2. After Rügen, the Andromeda docks off Bornholm and then on the Danish island of Christiansø. The crew begins to get a picture of the situation on the high seas. Much of the ship is worn out. The boat groans with every turn. The walls are scratched. The autopilot is defective. The 75 HP diesel engine rattles like an old tractor. There isn't much traffic on the Baltic Sea. The few ships they cross pay little attention to the small boat. The crew searches for the pipelines with a sonar and probably carries out several dives. There is, at most, 1 dive per day. At the end of the second week of September, a storm brews. The wind sweeps across the Baltic Sea at 20 knots. The waves are up to 2 meters high. They seek shelter for a few days in a small harbor in Swedish Zandham. A few days later, clear skies, abating wind. The waves beat against the yacht. Most of the crew is seasick. The conditions for diving are just about acceptable. The sonar hums. The crew is tense. Then, a signal. The pipeline is found, 80 meters, deep, directly under the Andromeda. It's now or never. The crew throws a rope with a weight attached into the water. About a minute later, it reaches the bottom.
An den Ostsee-Pipelines Nord Stream 1 und 2 sind mehrere Lecks entdeckt worden, aus denen Gas ins Meer strömt.
Tonight, sabotage at sea. That's what President Biden is calling the leaks and explosions along the Nord Stream pipeline.
Про це йдеться в заяві прокурора Матса Юнкера.
On the surface, a canister wrapped in a garbage bag serves as a buoy. It serves as an orientation, so that they are not carried adrift. Two divers strap on their compressed air cylinders. Then they grab a compressed air cylinder filled with explosives. Carefully, they step off the platform at the stern. With a carabiner, they attach the cylinder to the rope. One last check. Then, they dive down and follow the rope. This is the pipeline. 80 meters underwater. It is cold.
Die Vermutung liegt sehr, sehr nahe, dass die Polen den ukrainischen Taucher gewarnt haben und die ukrainische Regierung gewarnt haben, um ihn rechtzeitig außer Landes zu bringen, um zu verhindern, dass er festgenommen wird und dass ihm in Deutschland der Prozess gemacht wird.
And dark. The pressure on the human body here is about 9 times higher than above water. 2 cones of light slowly approach. They only have 15 minutes at this depth. To place the bomb, they have to find a connecting seam on the pipeline. The cone of light only reaches 2 meters. Here is one. They place a silicone cushion to increase the explosive effect. Done. Ascending from such depths is risky. There is a risk of nitrogen narcosis or oxygen poisoning. If you ascend too quickly, you risk unconsciousness or death. There is no decompression chamber on the Andromeda to treat such emergencies. Therefore, the divers have to make several stops. They need about 40 minutes to ascend. The yacht has moved on during the dive to avoid attracting attention.
Man könnte natürlich argumentieren, dass der ukrainische Staat wenig Interesse daran hat, dass man eines der Hauptgeberländer der Waffen derart erzürnt und dass man sozusagen da Gefahr läuft, keine Waffen mehr zu bekommen.
Now, it comes back to the dive site. The crew is relieved. In total, they place at least 6 such bombs in several dives along the 2 pipelines. The explosive devices have a timer set for September 26th. On the morning of September 23rd, the Andromeda is drifting abandoned in the harbor of Rostock-Warnemünde. Employees of Mola Yachting want to take back the chartered yacht, but no one is on board. Several leaks have been discovered on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in the Baltic Sea, from which gas is flowing into the sea. 3 days later, the crew learns from television that the mission was successful. However, one of the strands of Nord Stream 2 remains intact. The saboteurs accidentally blew up the strand twice. June 2024. The Polish authorities received the European arrest warrant for Volodymyr S., the sender, the German Attorney General. Noted therein, his home address in a Warsaw suburb. Under EU law, the Polish Public Prosecutor's Office would have to arrest him without further review. But the Poles, apparently, do nothing. The assumption is very, very close that the Poles warned the Ukrainian diver and the Ukrainian government to get him out of the country in time to prevent him from being arrested and put on trial in Germany. On July 6th at 6:20 a.m., a BMW with a Ukrainian license plate and diplomatic status crosses the Polish border into Ukraine. In the passenger seat, Vladimir S. Since then, the alleged saboteur has been in hiding. The alleged rest of the crew is not being sought at all due to a lack of evidence. To this day, it has not been conclusively clarified who is behind the attack. All accused deny the act. There are many indications that the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces approved the plans himself. Whether Zelensky knew about it is unclear. According to many experts, the attack was most likely an act of Ukrainian patriots. Whether the attack was also in the interest of the Ukrainian government is doubtful. One could, of course, argue that the Ukrainian state has little interest in angering one of the main donor countries of weapons in such a way, and that one runs the risk of no longer receiving weapons. What is clear is that the alleged perpetrators saw the pipelines as an acute threat to Ukraine and therefore also as a legitimate military target. Today, no more Russian gas flows through the pipelines. Germany has managed to become independent of Russian gas in a short time. Nord Stream 1 and 2 were the most expensive, longest, and most controversial underwater pipelines the world has ever seen. Now, the $2 billion projects lie unused and partially destroyed on the seabed of the Baltic Sea. Since March, there has been discussion about whether gas should soon flow through Nord Stream 2 again. A U.S. investor allegedly wants to buy and repair the pipeline. How realistic that is and how German politics will react to it is completely unclear.